Hello, everybody. My name is MariejaneLopez, and I will be presenting my final project on building a geodatabase for the American Airmail Society. Starting off with a brief history of airmail, the United States Post Office Department first established airmail services in 1918 and helped develop infrastructure and technology, such as by training pilots, establishing routes, and testing aircraft. This establishment was the predecessor of the United States Postal Service that we know today. Airmail services laid the foundation for the modern airline industry, bringing more efficient long distance travel and communication, and ultimately the growth of commercial aviation as the advancement of planes began to allow for passenger transportation. The expansion of network routes was said to have brought pride amongst Americans as they witnessed and experienced the successes of airmail. My project was initiated by the American Airmail Society. They are an aerophilatelic organization devoted to the collection, promotion, and study of airmail and related aspects. For example, they're interested in airmail etiquette, postal markings, any documents sent by air, and rates and routes of first flights. They are also a hub for airmail enthusiasts and collectors, and they provide great resources to their members. Connecting back to this project, the spatial analysis of airmail can allow for a better understanding of historical airmail archives and more specifically airmail routes. And a geodatabase also provides organization for spatial and non-spatial data collection. Having a form of spatial analysis can lead to further geospatial technology use, which could contribute to educational use and visual representation of historical periods and achievements. So here we can see the objectives of the project, starting with 1, to identify and categorize historical airmail transportation data, such as by route, year, destinations, etc. And secondly, to design a geodatabase capable of storing various historical airmail related data, whether it's spatial or non-spatial. Third, to actualize the geodatabase using appropriate GIS software and tools. Fourth, to populate the geodatabase with a provided assortment of historical airmail data. And lastly, to demonstrate the use of the geodatabase for spatial analysis and visualization through map layouts. Overall, the objective for this project was to provide a nice starting point for the client to begin their spatial analysis journey. So for this project, I was to create and actualize a historical airmail geodatabase with custom shapefiles. Following the flowchart over here on the left of the methodology, we're starting with data prep and organization. There was an ample amount of data prep and organization, which involved manipulating the data I was provided by the organization into a format compatible for ArcGIS Pro and adding it into the geodatabase. I had to consider how to best organize the data for smooth integration into ArcGIS Pro and also for the geodatabase's organization itself. These images here on the right are examples of raw data that I was provided by the client. And as we can kind of see, it's not necessarily ArcGIS friendly. I had to figure out which information would be retained and incorporated into attribute tables throughout like the data sets. The bottom image here conveys the resulting organized data, which was organized into columns of like city, state, route, year, mode of transport. This was all confirmed with the client to ensure that it did incorporate the data that they wanted in their geodatabase. And then moving on to adding XY data. The XY data, to be able to plot this historical airmail data, was obtained from airports data from Esri's data hub. There were some null entries for smaller cities, as not all cities had airports. So these needed to be manually substituted for another city in the same state that did have an airport. And after adding the XY data, the stops and routes were then created using tools in ArcGIS Pro where data was selected by route, and then a layer was made using the Make Layer from Selected Features tool, followed by the Points to Line tool. This was repeated for each route within the dataset, and the process was then repeated for each of the remaining feature datasets as well. So the three datasets for this project were the Contract Airmail 1926 routes, the Transcontinental Air Transport 1929 routes, and the Army Emergency Airmail 1934 routes. And as I mentioned earlier about the raw data here on the left is some of the CAM 1926 data, and then this on the right is some of the Army emergency data. And in here below, we can see that it was reorganized similar to what like an attribute table would look like. The organization of the raw data definitely took some trial and error to realize how to best structure it all for smooth integration. And then here's an image providing a glimpse at what the geodatabase organization looked like. It contains what I like to call the master tables of data for each dataset. So here we have like the CAM 134, AM 1934, and the TAT 1929 tables. And then we also have the airport data from Esri, the state boundaries from the US Census, and then the three data sets with their stops and routes that I created. We can also see some of the minor metadata details on the right here, which I maintained throughout the geodatabase. And then these next images provide a closer look as you can see the data within the feature data sets. So here on the left, we can see some of the routes within the Army emergency, and then which were named, according to their route name within the data set. And then here on the right, the CAM 134, we could even see the point shapefile, which contained all the stops within the data set as well, and then following with the lines and routes. And then for the study area, the first map layout here was created to provide a glimpse at all of the historical airmail data at once, just showing a spread of how the data is distributed. I did this to get a better idea of what I'd be working with. Also, of course, it is conveying the study area itself, which is the contiguous United States. Moving on to the map layouts that were requested by the client, the Transcontinental Air Transport 1929 is considered the pioneering American airline, as it was the first to offer scheduled coast-to-coast passenger transport. Here we can see an eastward and a westward route. The client requested a simple map background with state initials. And then the second data set in this project was the Contract Airmail 1926, which consisted of 6 routes that were contracted out to private airlines. There was quite a few overlapping routes, which led to me utilizing different patterns, line thickness, and pops of color for visibility. I also included an inset map for the area on the East Coast for easier visibility. And lastly, we have the Army emergency flights of 1934, which was operated by the U.S. Army Air Corps after the president canceled out the contracts This led to quite a few issues due to the lack of experience for the Army, as well as bad weather and just some aircraft issues. And then going back to the map itself, there were around 34 routes and an extensive coverage area for this emergency airmail route. This map was the most challenging due to the amount of routes to be displayed at once. I had to ensure visibility of routes by selecting different colors, making sure none of the colors were too similar to each other, different patterns and line thickness choices. I also included an inset map here to capture the detail on the most congested area of the East Coast. And then wrapping up on this project, the historical airmail data was studied and the relationship between the spatial and non-spatial data was considered and analyzed. The data was organized and implemented in a way that allows for potential query searches as requested, allowing the client to look at and study the data in different ways. The three data sets, the Transcontinental Air Transport 1929, the Contract Airmail 1926, and the Army Emergency Airmail 1934, were all created and visualized into their own respective map layouts. And then some final notes on this project are that it really enhances the accessibility of historical airmail data, and it may be further expanded on and utilized in geospatial technological applications such as story map or dashboard to allow for more like a more interactive use of the data. And overall, I really enjoyed working on this project and would like to thank anyone and everyone who tuned in for this presentation. Thank you.